I can't have a homeless woman sleeping on my couch when my business associates might drop by. Sterling Randolph declared his voice a frigid dismissal that cut through the humid summer air. A searing flush climbed Sylvia's neck, settling into a dull throb behind her eyes. Unbeknownst to him, clutched in the pocket of her ash-stained jeans, lay the crumpled slip of paper bearing Ethan Thorne's private number. The acrid scent of smoke still clung to Sylvia's hair. A grim perfume for a woman who at 64 found herself standing on her only daughter's pristine white doorstep, with nothing but a small duffel bag and the clothes on her back. 43 years. 43 years of sweat, toil, and dreams had been reduced to ash in a single afternoon. Her farmhouse, the weathered barn, where she'd raised prize-winning cattle, the apple orchard her late husband Arthur had planted with his own calloused hands, all consumed by the summer wildfire. The insurance adjuster's words had been as dry and brittle as the charred remains of her life. Months to process might not cover rebuilding costs. She had nowhere else to go. Eleanor, her daughter, opened the door, a vision of effortless elegance in a silk blouse that Sylvia knew cost more than her entire month's grocery budget used to. Eleanor's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up a silent, almost theatrical performance of dismay as her gaze swept over Sylvia's soot-stained jeans and the pathetic duffel. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Eleanor's voice, a melodic instrument, usually now carried a familiar undertone of inconvenience. A note Sylvia had grown accustomed to over the years. "The farm burned down, sweetheart. I lost everything." Sylvia's voice cracked, a betrayal of the strength she tried to project. "I was hoping I could stay with you and Sterling for a few days while I figure things out." Before Eleanor could respond, Sterling materialized behind her, an impeccably tailored shadow. Her son-in-law had always been particular, almost fastidious about appearances. The look of unadulterated horror that contorted his face as he took in Sylvia's disheveled state would forever be etched into her memory. "Absolutely not," he stated, stepping protectively in front of his wife as if Sylvia were a contagion. "Look at you. You're covered in ash and God knows what else. You'll ruin my Persian rug. That thing cost $15,000. The words were a physical blow. Sylvia felt her cheeks burn, a searing shame that reached deeper than the surface of her skin. "I could clean up first, Sterling. I just need—" "What you need is to figure out your own problems." He interrupted, his voice cold as the coming winter. "We have a certain lifestyle here. An image matters. I can't have a homeless woman sleeping on my couch when my business associates might drop by." "Homeless woman?" The phrase echoed, reverberating in the hollow chamber of her chest. In his eyes, that's all she was now. Not Arthur's widow, not Eleanor's mother, not the woman who had nurtured and sacrificed for the daughter he claimed to love. Just a burden, a discardable inconvenience. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably beside Sterling, her gaze flickering between her mother and husband, but she didn't contradict him. Her own daughter, the child Sylvia had nursed through pneumonia at age 6, for whom she'd worked double shifts to put through college, stood there in silence while her husband denigrated Sylvia. "Please," Sylvia whispered, hating the desperate tremor in her voice. "I raised you, Eleanor. I sacrificed everything for you. Doesn't that mean anything?" For a fleeting moment, Sylvia thought she saw a flicker in Eleanor's eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or a nascent regret. But then Sterling placed a possessive, almost proprietary hand on Eleanor's shoulder, and whatever fragile compassion might have been there vanished. "Mother, you have to understand our position," Eleanor said. Her voice carefully measured a rehearsed performance. "We live in an exclusive neighborhood. Sterling is right about appearances. Maybe you could try calling your sister in Portland." Her sister in Portland. The same sister who hadn't spoken to Sylvia in 8 years after their bitter falling out over Arthur's funeral arrangements. The sister who had made it abundantly clear Sylvia wasn't welcome in her life. Eleanor knew this, yet she suggested it anyway. I see Sylvia managed her throat tight with unshed tears. I understand perfectly. Sterling was already closing the door. I'm sure you'll figure something out, Sylvia. You always were resourceful. The door clicked shut with a decisive final sound, leaving Sylvia standing alone on their meticulously manicured porch. Through the frosted glass panel, she could just discern their silhouettes moving away, undoubtedly retreating to whatever expensive dinner they'd been enjoying before she interrupted their perfect evening. Sylvia stood there for several minutes. Shock and disbelief, warring with a pain so profound it felt like drowning. This was her daughter, her only child. The little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when Sylvia had to work late shifts at the diner to make ends meet. Where was that child now? Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Eleanor. Mum, I'm sorry, but Sterling is right. Maybe this is the wake-up call you need to start planning for your future more responsibly. There are senior living facilities that might help. Senior living facilities, code for anywhere but here. Sylvia walked back to her old pickup truck, the one thing that had survived the inferno, because she'd driven it to town for supplies when the fire started. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the keys. Where could she go? The nearest motel was 30 miles away, and she had only $200 in her checking account. As she sat in the truck, the full crushing weight of her situation crashed over her. She was 64, homeless, and apparently unwanted by her own family. The farm that had been her identity, her livelihood, her legacy, gone. The daughter she'd devoted her life to raising, lost to greed and social climbing. But as she stared at their perfect house, with its perfect lawn and perfect facade, something shifted inside her. The crushing despair began to transform into something else, something harder, something that had been building for years as she watched Eleanor become someone Sylvia barely recognized. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in 15 years. Her finger hovered over the number, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Would he even remember her? Would he care? There was only one way to find out. As she stared at that name on her phone screen, Sylvia realized her daughter had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Eleanor had no idea who she had just turned away. None of them did. And when they found out what Sylvia had been keeping from them all these years, their perfect little world would never be the same. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Eleanor had just struck the match. Sitting in that parking lot outside Eleanor's house, Sylvia couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. Each one felt like a knife twist, reminding her of everything she'd given up for the daughter who'd just slammed the door in her face. She remembered the day Arthur died. Eleanor was only 12, crying so hard at the funeral that she'd made herself sick. Sylvia had held her all night in that narrow hospital bed, while Eleanor retched from grief, promising her that everything would be okay, even though Sylvia had no idea how she'd keep that promise. Arthur's life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. The farm was drowning in debt, and Sylvia had a 7th-grade daughter who needed stability more than ever. So Sylvia did what any mother would do. She worked. She worked 3 jobs. Breakfast shift at Murphy's Diner, afternoon cleaning houses for the wealthy families on the hill, and night shifts at the textile factory when she could get them. Eleanor never knew about the nights. Sylvia cried herself to sleep exhausted and aching, wondering if she was strong enough to hold everything together. She never saw Sylvia eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, so there'd be enough money for Eleanor's school clothes. She was just a child. She shouldn't have had to know. But what broke Sylvia's heart most was how Eleanor started looking at her during those years. Like Sylvia was an embarrassment. Like her calloused hands and tired eyes somehow made her less than the other mothers who drove fancy cars and didn't smell like diner grease. When Eleanor was 16, she stopped bringing friends home. "It's just easier to hang out at their houses, Mother," she'd say. What she meant was that their houses were nicer, their mothers more polished. Sylvia wasn't the kind of mother Eleanor wanted her friends to see. Sylvia should have been angry. Instead, she worked harder. She wanted to give Eleanor everything those other kids had. She sacrificed her own dreams, her own future, telling herself it would all be worth it when her daughter succeeded. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her now. All those years of trying to make Eleanor's life perfect, and she'd grown up to become exactly like the people who'd looked down on Sylvia. But there was another child in those memories. A boy whose story was intertwined with theirs, in ways Eleanor never fully understood. Ethan Thorne lived in the falling-down house next to their farm. His parents were the town drunks. Everyone knew it, but nobody talked about it, not directly. When Ethan was 8 years old, he started showing up at their kitchen door during dinner time, always with some excuse. "My mum wanted to know if you had any sugar. Can I pet your cats?" "My dad says, do you need help with anything?" The truth was written all over his thin frame and hollow eyes. The boy was hungry, and not just for food. He was starving for kindness, for someone to notice him, for a place where raised voices didn't mean someone was about to get hurt. Arthur had seen it before Sylvia did. That boy needs looking after. He'd said one evening as they watched 8-year-old Ethan through their kitchen window, sitting alone on his front steps. His folks aren't right. After Arthur died, Ethan became Sylvia's shadow. He'd appear every morning before school, helping with farm chores without being asked. When Sylvia came home from her shifts exhausted and barely able to stand, he'd have already fed the chickens and gathered the eggs. "You don't have to do that." Sweetheart Sylvia told him one afternoon when she found him mucking out stalls that were supposed to be her responsibility. "I like helping," he said simply, his young voice earnest. "Besides, you take care of everyone else. Someone should take care of you too." That's when Sylvia knew this boy had an old soul. He was only 9, but he understood something about love and loyalty that many adults never learn. He understood that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. Ethan never complained when his father came home drunk and violent. He never asked Sylvia to call social services, though God knows she should have. Instead, he'd just show up at her door with his homework, and Sylvia would let him do it at her kitchen table while she cooked dinner. On the worst nights when the yelling from next door got too loud, Sylvia would find him sleeping in their barn come morning, curled up in a pile of hay, seeking refuge from the chaos of his own home. Eleanor tolerated him because Sylvia insisted, but she never truly accepted him. "Why does he always have to be here?" she'd whine, when Ethan joined them for Sunday dinners or family movie nights. "Because he needs us," Sylvia would tell her. "Sometimes we're the family people choose, not just the one they're born into." Eleanor would roll her eyes and retreat to her room. Even at 12, 13, 14, Eleanor had already decided that Ethan Thorne was beneath her notice. He was poor, his clothes were second-hand, and his parents were the kind of people respectable families whispered about. But Sylvia saw something in that boy. A fierce intelligence that school couldn't quite nurture, a determination that reminded her of her own younger self. When he was 15, he taught himself computer programming from library books. When he was 16, he was fixing neighbors' computers for spending money. When he was 17, he was already talking about college, about getting out of their small town and making something of himself. The last real conversation Sylvia had with Ethan was the night before he left for college. He'd earned a full scholarship to MIT, something that still amazed their small-town high school counselor. They sat on Sylvia's front porch, sharing a thermos of coffee and watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "I wouldn't have made it without you, Miss Sylvia," he'd said quietly, his voice thick with a gratitude that both warmed and broke her heart. "You know that, right? You know." Sylvia squeezed his hand, her own fingers rough from years of farm work. "You would have found a way, Ethan. You're stronger than you know." Maybe he conceded, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. But you gave me something I never had before. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You gave me a family, a real one. That was 15 years ago. Ethan Thorne had kept in touch for the first few years of college, sending Sylvia Christmas cards and the occasional letter about his studies. Then life took over the way it does, and the contact grew sporadic. Last Sylvia had heard through town gossip he'd graduated from MIT and moved to Silicon Valley. Someone said he'd started his own company, but Sylvia had never paid much attention to the rumors, too busy just trying to keep her head above water. Now, sitting in her truck outside Eleanor's perfect house, Sylvia stared at his name in her phone contacts. Ethan Thorne. The scared little boy who used to help her feed chickens had become a man she barely knew. Would he even remember the woman who'd made him peanut butter sandwiches and helped him with homework? More importantly, would he care that she needed help now? Her finger hovered over his number as another painful realization hit her. She had raised 2 children in that farmhouse. One was her biological daughter, who'd just proven that blood meant nothing to her when it came to inconvenience. The other was a boy Sylvia had chosen to love, who had chosen to love her back. Maybe it was time to find out which kind of family really mattered. Sylvia's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. 15 years. It had been 15 years since she'd heard Ethan's voice. And here she was about to call him at her lowest moment, covered in the ashes of her old life with the cold sting of rejection still fresh. What if he'd forgotten her? What if he was busy, successful, surrounded by important people who wouldn't understand why some old farm woman was interrupting his evening? But what choice did she have? She was 64, homeless, and apparently worthless to her own daughter. The truck was getting cold, and she needed to make a decision before the local motel filled up for the night. She pressed the call button before she could lose her nerve. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Her heart sank with each ring, a heavy stone dropping into a bottomless well. Of course he wouldn't answer. Why would a successful businessman take calls from unknown numbers at 8:30 on a Friday evening? She was about to hang up when she heard his voice. Hello. It was deeper now. Mature, laced with an easy authority she hadn't expected. But there was something in the tone. A warmth beneath the professional veneer that made her throat close up with recognition. This was still Ethan. Her Ethan, even after all these years. Ethan. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, thin and reedy. This is Sylvia. Sylvia Morrison. From Miss Sylvia. The change in his voice was instant. Electric. Miss Sylvia. Oh my God. Are you okay? Is everything all right? He remembered. Not only did he remember, but the first thing he asked was if she was okay. Tears, hot and fast, started flowing before she could stop them, carving clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. I'm sorry for calling you out of the blue like this, she managed through her tears, the words catching in her throat. I know it's been so long. And you probably have a family now, responsibilities. Stop, he said firmly, but gently, his voice resonating with an unshakable sincerity. Don't you dare apologize. You can call me anytime, anywhere for anything. You know that. Now tell me what's wrong. So she did. She told him about the wildfire, about losing the farm, about standing on Eleanor's doorstep, only to be turned away like a beggar. She told him about Sterling, calling her homeless, about Eleanor's chilling silence, about having nowhere to go. The words poured out like water through a broken dam, 15 years of distance collapsing in the span of a single phone call. Ethan listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and growing anger, each one a balm to her wounded spirit. When she finished, there was a long pause that made her stomach clench with fear. Had she burdened him too much? Had she presumed too much on a relationship that existed decades ago? Miss Sylvia, he said. Finally, his voice thick with emotion. a raw edge of protectiveness. Sylvia hadn't heard in years. That woman is not the little girl you raised. What Eleanor did tonight is unforgivable. The fierce loyalty in his voice reminded her of the teenage boy who used to get angry when kids at school said cruel things about Sylvia's second-hand clothes or her multiple jobs. Even then, Ethan had defended her more fiercely than her own daughter ever had. "She's still my daughter," Sylvia said weakly, though the words felt hollow like dry leaves in her mouth. "No," Ethan said with quiet certainty. "A daughter doesn't abandon her mother. A daughter doesn't call the woman who sacrificed everything for her homeless. You know what you are to me, Miss Sylvia. You're the only mother I ever really had, and no mother of mine is going to spend tonight in a shelter or a car." Sylvia's breath caught. "Ethan, I wasn't calling to ask for money, or I know you weren't. That's exactly why I'm going to help you. Where are you right now?" She looked around the parking lot, still within sight of Eleanor's house, a beacon of her rejection. "I'm still in Millbrook, in my truck outside Eleanor's house, actually. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you're in shock, which is completely understandable. Are you safe to drive?" "I think so." "Good. There's a Marriott about 20 miles north on Route 9. Do you know it?" Sylvia did. It was the fancy hotel where Eleanor and Sterling had held their lavish wedding reception. "Yes, but Ethan, I can't afford." "You're not paying for anything. I'm going to call them right now and book you a suite. Get yourself there. Order room service, take a hot bath, and try to get some sleep. Can you do that for me?" A suite at the Marriott. Sylvia couldn't even imagine what that would cost. But Ethan was talking like money was no object. "Ethan, you don't have to have Yes, I do. You took care of me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to take care of you." His voice softened, a tender note replacing the earlier steel. "Besides, you're going to need to be well rested for tomorrow." Tomorrow, Sylvia's mind struggled to process. "I'm flying out first thing in the morning. I'll be there by noon." Flying out. "Where are you flying from? San Francisco?" "Don't worry about the details, Miss Sylvia. Just focus on getting somewhere safe tonight. I'll handle everything else." San Francisco was 3,000 miles away. The idea that Ethan would drop everything and fly across the country just because she called seemed impossible. "You don't have to come all this way. I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Miss Sylvia." His voice was gentle but firm, unwavering. "Do you remember what you told me the night before I left for college?" Sylvia thought back to that evening on her front porch, the thermos of coffee, the vibrant sunset, painting the sky. "I remember we talked about a lot of things. You told me that family takes care of family no matter what. You said that when someone you love is hurting, you don't hesitate. You don't make excuses. You just show up." The words came back to her then. She'd been trying to prepare him for the world beyond their small town, trying to teach him about loyalty and love, in a way his own parents never had. I remember she whispered, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. "Well, I'm showing up." "And Miss Sylvia, there's something else you need to know. Something about what I've been doing with my life since I left Millbrook." Her heart started beating faster. There was something in his voice, a weight, that suggested this conversation was about to take another turn. "What is it, sweetheart?" "The company I started after MIT, it's done pretty well for itself, actually. It's done better than well, Miss Sylvia. I'm not just comfortable. I'm wealthy. Very wealthy." The word hung in the air between them, shimmering with unreality. Wealthy? The boy who used to wear Arthur's hand-me-down shirts, because his own clothes had holes in them, was wealthy. "How wealthy?" Sylvia asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Forbes put my net worth at $2.8 billion last year." The phone nearly slipped from her hands. Billion. Not million. Billion. Ethan Thorne, the skinny kid who used to help her gather eggs, was a billionaire. "I know it's a lot to process," he continued, his voice calm, matter-of-fact. "But here's what matters. Every success I've ever had, every dollar I've ever earned, every achievement that's brought me to this point. It all started in your kitchen, Miss Sylvia. You gave me the foundation that made everything else possible. Sylvia couldn't speak. Her mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the scared little boy in her memories with the man on the phone who was casually discussing billions of dollars. Tomorrow, when I get to Millbrook, we're going to have a conversation with your daughter and her husband. They're going to learn exactly who they turned away tonight. But more importantly, you're never going to worry about having a roof over your head again. I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me, Ethan. I don't need billions of dollars. I know you don't. That's one of the reasons you deserve them. His voice grew warmer, more tender. Miss Sylvia, for 15 years, I've been trying to figure out how to repay you for saving my life. Tomorrow I finally get the chance. As Sylvia hung up the phone and started the truck to drive to the Marriott, one thought kept echoing in her mind. Eleanor had just refused shelter to a woman who'd raised a billionaire who still called her his real mother. Her daughter had no idea what was coming for her, but she was about to find out that some mistakes can't be undone, and some bridges once burned take everything else down with them. The boy Sylvia had chosen to love was coming home, and he was bringing enough power to change all their lives forever. Sylvia woke up in this most luxurious hotel room she'd ever seen. Egyptian cotton sheets, a marble bathroom larger than her entire farmhouse kitchen, a view of the distant mountains that took her breath away. For a moment she forgot where she was and why she was there. Then it all came rushing back. The fire. Eleanor's rejection. Ethan's phone call. Even in the morning light it seemed impossible. The scared little boy from next door was now worth billions, and he was flying across the country to help her. She checked her phone. 9:47. In the morning, he'd said he'd be here by noon. She'd barely finished her complimentary breakfast, a lavish spread of fresh fruit pastries and artisanal coffee, when her phone rang. Miss Sylvia? I just landed at the regional airport. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. Landed. Not my plane landed, or the flight arrived, just... I landed like he owned the aircraft, which Sylvia was beginning to realize he probably did. Should I meet you in the lobby? Actually, Ethan replied, a hint of steel in his voice. I was thinking we might pay a visit to your daughter and her husband first, if you're up for it. Sylvia's stomach clenched. Ethan, I don't want any trouble. There won't be trouble. I just think it's time they understood who they turned away last night. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Just let me do the talking. 23 minutes later, Sylvia heard a sound that made everyone in the hotel lobby look up from their phones and lattes. It was the unmistakable whop, whop, whop of helicopter blades growing louder by the second, vibrating through the grand chandeliers and polished marble floors. Sylvia walked outside just in time to see a sleek black helicopter gleaming in the morning sun, settling onto the hotel's meticulously manicured front lawn. The hotel staff rushed around frantically, probably trying to figure out if this was legal, while guests pressed against windows phones held aloft to capture the surreal sight. The helicopter door opened with a soft hiss, and Ethan Thorne stepped out. Sylvia barely recognized him. The skinny boy with second-hand clothes had been replaced by a man in an impeccably tailored suit, moving with the quiet confidence that comes from having enough power to reshape the world around you. His jawline was sharper, his shoulders broader, his gaze intense. But when he saw Sylvia, his entire face transformed into the warm, open smile she remembered from 15 years ago. Miss Sylvia. He walked straight to her, his long strides covering the distance quickly, and wrapped her in the kind of hug that made her feel like everything, truly everything, was finally going to be okay. He was taller than she remembered, broader, but his arms still felt like safety. Look at you, Sylvia whispered, pulling back to study his face, tracing the lines of maturity around his eyes. You're all grown up. Thanks to you. His eyes were serious now, the playful warmth receding slightly. "Are you ready for this?" Sylvia nodded, though she wasn't sure she was ready for anything anymore. But with Ethan by her side, she felt a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The helicopter ride to Eleanor's neighborhood took less than 5 minutes. Ethan had called ahead, arranging permission to land on the municipal park across from her house. Though Sylvia suspected someone with his resources didn't really need to ask permission for much. As they descended, she could see people pouring out of their houses, pointing at the helicopter, their faces a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. This was Millbrook's exclusive Woodlawn Estates, where the biggest excitement was usually someone getting a new BMW. A private helicopter landing in their neighborhood was definitely not normal. Sylvia spotted Eleanor's house, then Eleanor herself standing in her front yard with Sterling beside her. They were staring at the helicopter with the same bewildered expression as their neighbors, their perfect facade momentarily shattered by the intrusion. Ethan helped Sylvia down from the aircraft, his hands steady and reassuring on her arm, a silent anchor in the whirlwind of noise and attention. "Remember," he said quietly as they walked across the park toward the street. The helicopter blades slowly spinning down behind them. A dramatic exclamation mark on their arrival. You don't owe them explanations. You don't owe them anything. By the time they reached Eleanor's driveway, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at what they probably thought was a respectful distance, their faces alight with avid curiosity. Sterling was trying to project an air of stern authority. His shoulders squared, but Sylvia could see the uncertainty bordering on panic in his eyes. Eleanor just looked utterly bewildered, her perfect composure finally cracking under the unexpected spectacle. Mother Eleanor called out, her voice a reedy whisper, as Sylvia and Ethan approached. "What's going on? Whose helicopter is that?" Ethan stepped slightly in front of Sylvia, a protective gesture that brought an unexpected warmth to her chest, reminding her of the teenage boy who used to walk her to her car after late shifts at the diner. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the calm, measured authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. "I believe you met my mother last night." Eleanor's mouth opened slightly, a small, soundless gasp escaping. "Your mother? I don't understand." "Sylvia Morrison." Ethan clarified, his gaze unwavering, pinning Eleanor where she stood. "The woman you turned away from your door. The woman your husband called homeless." His voice was perfectly controlled, almost impossibly calm. But Sylvia could hear the steel cold and unyielding underneath. Sterling stepped forward, clearly attempting to reassert some semblance of control. "Now, wait just a minute. I don't know who you are, or why you think you can do Ethan Thorne." Ethan interrupted, extending his hand in a gesture that looked polite, but somehow made Sterling instinctively step backward. "You might know me better as Tommy Peterson. I used to live next door to Sylvia when I was a child." Sylvia watched the color drain from Sterling's face as recognition dawned. Even in their small town, Ethan's success story had become legendary. The poor kid who'd made it to MIT, who'd built a tech empire, who'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine just 6 months ago. "You're that Ethan Thorne?" Eleanor whispered, her eyes darting frantically between Ethan and Sylvia, a dawning horror in their depths. "The billionaire. I prefer to think of myself as Sylvia Morrison's son," Ethan said simply, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it flickered to Sylvia, then hardened again as it settled on Eleanor. The son who's going to make sure she never has to ask anyone for help again. The neighbors were getting closer now, drawn by the obvious tension and the increasingly surreal nature of the conversation unfolding in broad daylight on Millbrook's most prestigious street. Sterling, to his credit, tried to rally one last time. "Look, Mr. Thorne, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter." "You're absolutely right, Ethan," agreed, his voice cutting through Sterling's with effortless ease. "It is a family matter. That's why I'm here." He turned to look directly at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a quiet, devastating disappointment. Your mother raised me from the time I was 8 years old. She fed me when my own parents wouldn't help me with homework when they were too drunk to care, and made sure I had clean clothes for school. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on her table, and she always made room for one more. Eleanor's face was getting redder by the minute, a blotchy crimson spreading across her perfectly powdered cheeks. She never told me you two were still in touch. We weren't, Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion. Last night was the first time we'd spoken in 15 years. She called me because she had nowhere else to go. Because the daughter she raised, the daughter she sacrificed everything for, slammed the door in her face when she needed help most. We have our own family to think about. Sterling started, his voice cracking slightly. Family, Ethan repeated the word, letting it taste bitter on his tongue. Let me tell you about family, Mr. Randolph. Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't call each other homeless. And family sure as hell doesn't worry more about a Persian rug than the woman who gave up her own dreams so her daughter could have everything. The small crowd of neighbours was close enough now to hear every word. Sylvia could see phones being pulled out recording this confrontation that would be gossip gold for months to come. Ethan, please, Sylvia said softly, placing a hand on his arm. This is enough. He looked down at her, his expression softening immediately, all the steel melting away. No, Miss Sylvia, it's not nearly enough. But it's a start. He turned back to Eleanor and Sterling, his gaze hardening once more. I want you both to understand something. Sylvia Morrison is the most important person in my life. She always has been and she always will be. From this day forward, anything she needs, anything she wants, she gets. No questions asked. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, the crisp white contrasting sharply with the tailored fabric. This is the deed to a house about an hour from here. 7 bedrooms, 10 acres, full-time staff. If she wants it, it's hers now, free and clear. Eleanor's eyes widened, fixating on the envelope as if it held untold secrets. 7 bedrooms. I also set up a trust fund in her name this morning. Ethan continued, his voice utterly matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather instead of an amount of money that would change someone's life forever. $25 million. She'll never have to worry about money again. $25 million. Sylvia felt dizzy. The farmhouse that had burned down was worth maybe $200,000, and that included the land. Sterling looked like he might be sick. 25 million, that's just the start. Ethan continued, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. Miss Sylvia doesn't just get a house and money. She gets everything I have, every resource, every connection, every door that my success can open. She gets a family who actually appreciates what she's done. She already has a family, Eleanor said weakly, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, she had a daughter. A daughter who taught her last night that sometimes the family you choose is more loyal than the family you're born into. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the neighbours had stopped murmuring, sensing that they were witnessing something that would define relationships in Millbrook for years to come. Finally, Ethan turned back to Sylvia. Miss Sylvia, there's a car waiting to take you to your new home. The staff is expecting you, and I've arranged for someone to take you shopping for anything you need. Would you like to go see it? Sylvia nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. As they turned to walk back toward the helicopter, Eleanor's voice stopped them. Mother. Wait. Can we talk? Sylvia turned around slowly. Her daughter looked smaller, somehow diminished by the crushing weight of what she'd just learned. What would you like to talk about, sweetheart? I made a mistake last night. I should have... Sterling and I were just... She stumbled over the words, clearly struggling to find a way to undo what couldn't be undone. Ethan stepped forward again, his voice gentle but final. Mrs. Randolph, mistakes are when you forget to return a phone call or show up late to dinner. What you did last night wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And choices have consequences. As the helicopter lifted off its powerful rotors, kicking up a swirl of dust and leaves, Sylvia looked down at Eleanor standing in her perfect yard in front of her perfect house and felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not even pure satisfaction, but a profound, lingering pity. Eleanor had no idea what she'd lost until it was too late to get it back. Some lessons Sylvia knew could only be learned the hard way, and her daughter's education was just beginning. The house Ethan bought Sylvia was nothing like she'd ever imagined living in. Sitting on 10 acres of rolling hills outside of Millbrook, it was a colonial-style mansion with white pillars and wraparound porches that looked like something plucked from a glossy magazine. The staff, a gracious housekeeper named Maria, a diligent groundskeeper named Frank, and a warm, talented cook named Eleanor, treated her like royalty from the moment she walked through the front door. "This is your home now, Mrs. Morrison," Maria said warmly. Her voice soft and melodious as she showed Sylvia through room after room of elegant furniture and pristine decor. Mr. Thorne made it very clear that anything you need, anything you want changed, you just have to ask. That first week passed in a blur of luxury Sylvia had never experienced. Fresh flowers delivered daily, meals prepared exactly to her preferences. Eleanor somehow knowing her favorites without being told. A wardrobe consultant who helped her shop for clothes that actually fit properly for the first time in decades. Fabrics soft against her skin colors that brought out the forgotten vibrancy in her eyes. Sylvia felt like Cinderella, except her fairy godmother was a billionaire who still called her his real mother. Ethan visited every few days, always bringing something thoughtful. Books he thought she'd enjoy. Old photos he'd found of their neighborhood from his childhood news about mutual acquaintances from Millbrook. But mostly, he just wanted to sit with Sylvia on the front porch, drinking coffee, and talking like they used to when he was a teenager, sharing stories, dreams, and silences that spoke volumes. "Are you happy here?" he asked. During one of those visits, studying her face carefully, his keen eyes missing nothing, Sylvia looked out over the manicured gardens. The small lake with its graceful fountain, the life of ease and comfort that had replaced her burned-down farmhouse. "It's beautiful, Ethan. More beautiful than anything I ever dreamed of." "That's not what I asked." He smiled at her evasion, his persistence unwavering. Even as a child, he'd had a way of seeing through polite answers to the truth underneath. "I'm adjusting," Sylvia admitted. "It's a lot to get used to. Having people wait on me. I've never been waited on before. We can get you a different house if you prefer," Ethan offered immediately. "Smaller, maybe, closer to town." "No, sweetheart. This is perfect. I'm just not used to having people take care of me instead of the other way around." He reached over and squeezed her hand, his touch warm and comforting. "You spent 40-some years taking care of everyone else. It's your turn now." Later that same evening, as Sylvia was settling in with a book in what the staff called the library, an actual library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a rolling ladder, Maria knocked on the door. "Mrs. Morrison, your daughter is here. She says she needs to speak with you urgently." Sylvia's stomach clenched. She'd been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. "Show her in, please." Eleanor appeared in the doorway a moment later, her eyes wide as she took in the elegant room, her gaze lingering on the rich leather and gleaming wood. She'd clearly dressed carefully for this visit. Her best dress, her most expensive jewelry, her hair styled in the way she thought made her look most appealing. An attempt to project the image of a daughter worthy of such a setting. "Mother." She stood there uncertainly, hovering on the threshold, like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to enter fully. "Come in, sweetheart. Sit down." Eleanor perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her usually confident posture replaced by a fragile, almost hesitant air. For several moments, neither of them spoke. the silence punctuated only by the distant tick of a grandfather clock. Finally, Eleanor cleared her throat. "This place is incredible." "It is. I had no idea Ethan Thorne had done so well for himself. I mean, I knew he was successful, but this level of wealth." She gestured vaguely around the room, her voice trailing off in awe. "He's done very well." Another silence. Sylvia could see her struggling, her mind clearly racing, trying to formulate how to approach whatever she'd come to say. Finally, the words burst out of her, a dam breaking. "Mother, I made a terrible mistake the other night. Sterling and I both did. We were shocked, unprepared, and we reacted badly. But you have to understand, we never meant to hurt you." Sylvia studied her daughter's face, searching for genuine remorse, and seeing mostly panic, a desperate scramble to salvage what she perceived as a rapidly sinking ship. "What did you mean to do then?" "We just thought... I mean, you're so independent, so capable. We figured you'd work something out on your own. We didn't realize how serious the situation was. I told you I'd lost everything in the fire, Eleanor. How much more serious did it need to be?" Her cheeks flushed a deeper shade of red this time. "You're right. You're absolutely right. But Mother, we can fix this. Sterling and I have been talking, and we want to make things right between us. We want you to come home to our house. We've prepared the guest room for you. It's all ready. New sheets, fresh flowers, everything you need. You could move in this weekend if you want." Sylvia felt a sad smile tugging at her lips. The words sounded rehearsed, too perfect. And Ethan's house. Ethan's money. His trust fund. What happens to all of that? Eleanor's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something desperate and calculating underneath. "Well, I mean, you don't really need all this, do you? This house is so big, so impersonal. Wouldn't you rather be with family?" There it was, the real reason for her visit. She wanted Sylvia to give up the life Ethan had provided and come live in their guest room, where they could be close to her and, more importantly, to the $25 million trust fund. "I see." Sylvia stood up slowly, deliberately. "And what does Sterling think about having his homeless mother-in-law move in permanently?" Eleanor stood too, moving closer to Sylvia, her hands reaching out in a supplicating gesture. "He feels terrible about what he said. He wants to apologize personally. How generous of him. Mother, please. I know we hurt you, but we're family. We're your real family. This Ethan Thorne. I mean, yes, you helped him when he was a child, but that was a long time ago. He's just feeling guilty because he never stayed in touch. Once that guilt wears off, where will you be?" The words hit their target, awakening fears Sylvia had been trying to suppress. What if she was right? What if Ethan's generosity was just temporary guilt, a fleeting act of conscience, and once it faded, she'd be alone again with nowhere to go? But then Sylvia remembered his face when he stepped off that helicopter, the fierce protectiveness in his voice when he confronted Sterling, the unwavering certainty with which he still called her his mother. "You're worried he'll abandon me the way you did?" "Sylvia?" asked her voice, calm but penetrating. Eleanor flinched as if slapped. "That's not fair. We didn't abandon you. You slammed the door in my face, Eleanor. Your husband called me homeless and said I'd ruin his Persian rug. How is that not abandonment? We were protecting our home, our lifestyle." Eleanor retorted, her composure cracking, revealing the raw resentment beneath. "From your own mother." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and stinging. Eleanor's composure finally cracked, completely dissolving into frustrated tears. "Fine. Yes, we were protecting ourselves. From you, from your problems, your neediness, your constant reminders of everything we've worked so hard to rise above." The ugly truth poured out of her like poison, unfiltered and brutal. "Do you think it's easy being your daughter? Do you think I enjoyed growing up poor? Watching you work yourself to death? Being embarrassed by our second-hand everything? while my friends had nice things. Sylvia absorbed each word like a physical blow, the pain, a familiar ache in her chest. I did my best, Eleanor. I gave you everything I could. I know you did. Tears were streaming down her face now, mascara smudging. And I'm grateful. I really am. But I spent my whole childhood promising myself I'd never live like that again. I'd never be poor, never be looked down on, never have to worry about money. Sterling gave me that security. And when I saw you on the doorstep, it threatened it. Yes. No, I don't know. She sank back into the chair. Her perfect facade completely demolished, sobbing openly. I just know that when I saw you standing there with your soot-covered clothes and your desperate eyes, you looked like everything I'd run away from. And I panicked. The honesty was brutal, but at least it was honest. For the first time since she'd arrived, Sylvia felt like she was talking to her real daughter, instead of a carefully crafted performance. And now Sylvia asked gently, her voice softening, a sliver of the old motherly love surfacing. Now I realize I might have thrown away the most important relationship in my life for the sake of a Persian rug and social appearances. Her voice was small, defeated. I want to fix this, Mother. I need to fix this. Sylvia sat back down across from her. What you need and what you want might be two different things, sweetheart. What do you mean? You want to fix this because you've seen what I mean to Ethan, and you've realized there might be benefits to having me in your life. But do you actually want me, Eleanor? Do you want your mother with all my flaws and limitations and embarrassing history? Or do you want access to what my relationship with Ethan might provide? Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. No argument forming. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of a lifetime of complicated emotions. I don't know how to answer that, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. At least that's honest. What I do know, Eleanor continued, her eyes searching Sylvia's, is that I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was ashamed of our circumstances. And I know that losing you would destroy me. Sylvia reached over and took her daughter's hand, holding it gently. You haven't lost me, sweetheart. But the relationship we had before, the one where I gave and you took it for granted, that relationship is gone. It burned up with my farmhouse. Then what's left? I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe something better than what we had before. But that's up to you to decide. Eleanor squeezed her hand, a desperate plea in her eyes. How do I decide? You start by going home to Sterling and thinking about what kind of daughter you want to be going forward. Not what kind of daughter you think I want, or what kind will get you the most benefit, but what kind feels right to you. And you, what will you be doing while I'm figuring that out? Sylvia looked around the beautiful library, thought about Ethan's upcoming visit, about the peaceful life she was building in this place where she was valued simply for being herself. I'll be living my life, Eleanor. For the first time in decades, I'll be living just for me. After Eleanor left, Sylvia sat alone in the library for a long time, processing everything her daughter had said. The truth was painful. Yes, but it was also profoundly freeing. At least now she knew where she stood with her daughter. At least now she could stop hoping for something that had never really existed. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ethan. Hope you're having a good evening. Elena mentioned she's making your favorite pot roast tomorrow. Can't wait to join you for dinner. Sylvia smiled, feeling the knot in her chest loosen slightly. Some family is chosen, not born. And sometimes the family that chooses you loves you better than the family that shares your blood ever could. Eleanor would have to decide what kind of daughter she wanted to be. But Sylvia already knew what kind of son Ethan was, the kind who flew 3,000 miles to rescue the woman who'd rescued him first. The quiet rhythm of Sylvia's new life quickly established itself, a stark contrast to the relentless struggle of her past. She indulged in simple pleasures, long walks through the 10 acres, the scent of pine and damp earth, a constant balm, leisurely morning with Eleanor's gourmet breakfasts, evenings spent curled in the library with books she'd only dreamed of reading. Ethan's visits were a highlight. His presence a comforting anchor, a reminder that genuine love and loyalty still existed. Yet despite the luxurious comfort, a subtle unease began to prick at Sylvia. Eleanor's desperate plea, her confession of running from everything I'd run away from, resonated with a bitter truth. Sylvia had given her life to that farm to her daughter. And in losing it all, a nagging suspicion had begun to form. Was the fire truly just a tragic accident? Or was there more to the ashes than met the eye? The abruptness of the insurance adjuster's assessment, Sterling's disproportionate concern over a rug, Eleanor's casual dismissal of Sylvia's desperate situation, it all coalesced into a whisper of doubt. One afternoon, as Ethan meticulously reviewed some foundation documents with Sylvia in the sun-drenched study, she broached the subject. Ethan, could they look into the fire, the farm's records, anything that might seem unusual? She tried to keep her voice light, but the tremor was undeniable. Ethan set down his tablet, his gaze instantly perceptive. You think it wasn't an accident? I don't know what to think. Sylvia confessed, her fingers tracing the worn edge of a leather-bound book. But it feels too convenient. The land itself was valuable even before the fire. Arthur always said it had potential beyond just farming. Ethan nodded slowly. I'll have my forensic accounting and data teams start digging. They're the best in the business. They can reconstruct almost anything from fragments. His assurance was a comfort. What specifically are you looking for? Anything connected to the farm, Arthur's old business dealings. He had a partner once, decades ago, named Desmond Croft. They fell out before Arthur died. But Desmond was always a smooth talker. And Sterling. I want to know everything about Sterling Randolph's finances, his business deals, his associates. Consider it done, Ethan said, already pulling out his phone. This might take a while, but we'll find answers, Miss Sylvia. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Sterling, facing increasing social ostracization and mounting financial pressure from the public scandal, began their own calculated campaign to re-enter Sylvia's life. Their initial attempts were through tearful voicemails from Eleanor deleted without a listen. Then carefully worded letters full of regret and apologies. Finally, they tried calling the mansion directly. Maria, ever discreet, always forwarded the calls to Sylvia's personal line. Mother, please. Eleanor's voice, now devoid of its former condescension, sounded fragile over the phone one afternoon. I know you're busy, but Sterling and we're struggling. We need to talk to you. We've done some soul searching. We understand now. Sylvia, nestled in an armchair overlooking the lake, took a sip of herbal tea. What exactly do you understand, Eleanor? That we made a terrible mistake. That family is everything. That you are everything. The words felt hollow, rehearsed. We miss you, Mother. The house feels empty without you. My farmhouse felt empty after the fire. Sylvia retorted gently, a hint of ice in her tone. It felt empty after your father died, and you left for college, and I worked myself to the bone alone, a choked sob. We want to make it up to you. Sterling has been talking to a grief counsellor. He deeply regrets what he said. Really, Sylvia murmured, recalling Sterling's sneering face. That's commendable. Could we come visit just for a coffee? Sterling wants to apologize in person. This was the opening Sylvia needed. Perhaps, she said, feigning hesitation. A brief visit. Next Tuesday. For tea. 2:00. But understand, Eleanor, this is not a return to how things were. This is simply a conversation. Yes, of course. Thank you, Mother. Thank you so much. Eleanor's relief was palpable, almost sickening. The fake family dialogues began. Eleanor and Sterling arrived promptly next Tuesday dressed impeccably. A strained smile plastered on Sterling's face. He launched into a lengthy, rehearsed apology, eyes darting to Eleanor for approval. Sylvia, I cannot express the depth of my regret. My words were inexcusable. The pressure of business, the unexpected shock of your circumstances. I reacted poorly. You are family, and family should always come first. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Sylvia listened, observing the sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He sounded like a man reading from a script he barely believed. I appreciate your apology, Sterling, she said, her voice even unreadable. Forgiveness is a long process, but it begins with sincerity. Eleanor, meanwhile, was subtly surveying the grand rooms, her gaze lingering on the expensive artwork, the antique furniture, the view of the sprawling gardens. Her questions, seemingly innocent, were thinly veiled attempts to gauge Sylvia's new financial depth. This antique chaise lounge, mother, it's exquisite. So rare. Is it a French Empire piece? Eleanor's cooking is divine. How did you find such a treasure? This property must be enormous. The taxes alone. Sylvia, playing her part, offered polite, vague answers, letting them see just enough of her newfound opulence to fuel their avarice, but never revealing the specifics of Ethan's involvement or the true extent of her resources. She watched them, her mind a quiet calculating machine, noting their subtle shifts in demeanor. They were desperate, and desperation bred carelessness. A few weeks later, Ethan called his voice tense. Miss Sylvia, my team found something. It's disturbing. A series of old emails between Sterling Randolph and Desmond Croft, dating back to before the fire. They were discussing the farm's land, its hidden potential, and ways to accelerate liquidation. And then there's this. He played an audio file over the phone. It was crackly faint, but clear enough. 2 male voices. One was Sterling's unmistakably. The other was an older, gravelly voice Sylvia recognized with a chill Desmond Croft. The old woman is stubborn. Won't sell for a dime less than her sentimental value. It's prime land for the new resort project, Desmond. We need her out. Sterling's voice impatient. Sterling. Accidents happen. The summer bitter. Patience, Sterling. Accidents happen. The summer fires are always a blessing for problematic properties. A well-placed spark, a bit of wind. Who's going to question it? The other voice, gravelly and chillingly familiar, was Desmond Croft. Sylvia's stomach dropped. That laugh. A short, dry cackle like rustling leaves. Sylvia gripped the phone, her knuckles white. That laugh, she whispered, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning. I remember that laugh. Desmond used to do that when he thought he'd gotten away with something. A cold dread settled in her gut, mingling with a furious, righteous anger. The wildfire hadn't been an act of God. It had been an act of greed orchestrated by Sterling and Desmond. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The quick insurance assessment, the dismissive attitude, Sterling's relief that she was gone. This confirms it. Miss Sylvia, Ethan said, his voice hard. They burned your farm down. And it looks like Sterling was heavily involved, colluding with Croft to profit from the land after you were conveniently removed. Eleanor. Sylvia started, her voice faltering. Could Eleanor have known? There's no direct evidence linking Eleanor to the arson, but she certainly benefited from your displacement. Ethan stated, his tone professional, detached, yet imbued with a deep protectiveness towards Sylvia. And she was far too quick to accept your homelessness. Sylvia felt a cold, calculated fury rising within her, displacing the last vestiges of hurt. Her farm, her home, her husband's legacy, gone reduced to ash by her son-in-law and his accomplice. And Eleanor, her own daughter, had not only stood by, but actively participated in her humiliation. What are our options, Ethan? Sylvia asked, her voice clear, steady. A new resolve hardening her tone. We have enough for an immediate criminal investigation, Miss Sylvia. Arson, attempted fraud. Sterling and Croft would face severe charges. The evidence we've compiled is overwhelming. And given Sterling's current financial woes and public standing, he's particularly vulnerable. And Eleanor, Ethan paused. We could expose her complicity in your abandonment, which would further damage her reputation and potentially implicating her as an accessory after the fact, depending on how much she knew. But it would be a messy public spectacle. Are you sure that's what you want? Sylvia closed her eyes, picturing Eleanor's calculating eyes, her feigned remorse. The girl who used to cry during thunderstorms, now a woman whose ambition had eclipsed any semblance of compassion. I want them to understand the consequences of their choices, Ethan. All of them. She opened her eyes, a glint of steel in their depths. But not yet. Not this way. I want them to feel every single consequence, to truly understand the depth of their betrayal. I have a plan, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The grand unveiling of the Thorn Foundation's new Millbrook campus is next month. It's going to be a massive event televised nationally, with all the local dignitaries, investors, and society's elite in attendance. Sterling and Eleanor will undoubtedly be there, desperate to rub shoulders and salvage their image. We use that platform. We expose them when they least expect it, when they're at their most vulnerable, and when the impact will be maximum. Sylvia smiled, a slow, predatory curve of her lips that felt alien on her face, yet strangely satisfying. I like it, Ethan. I like it very much. The weeks leading up to the Thorn Foundation Gala were a whirlwind of carefully orchestrated moves. Ethan, with Sylvia's blessing, continued to allow Eleanor and Sterling carefully curated glimpses into Sylvia's new life, deepening their avarice and conviction that Sylvia was merely a vessel for Ethan's wealth. They saw the mansion, the staff, the designer clothes, the trust fund, and their efforts to ingratiate themselves grew more frantic, more transparent. Eleanor, increasingly desperate, began to push for Sylvia to integrate her new life with their old one. Mother, it's not right for you to live so far away from your family, she'd often say, conveniently forgetting her earlier rejection. Sterling and I feel so strongly that you should be closer. Perhaps you could invest in one of Sterling's new ventures. It would bring us all together. Sylvia would demur politely always, with a vague smile. Ethan handles all my financial affairs, dear. He's much more capable than I am with these things. But I'll mention your idea to him. She never did. Ethan's team, meanwhile, worked diligently in the shadows. Not just gathering more evidence, but planting seeds of doubt and misinformation about Sterling's business dealings. Whispers of shady practices, of questionable ethics, began to circulate among the elite circles Sterling so desperately coveted. The financial pressure on Sterling and Eleanor intensified. Their exclusive club memberships became tenuous, their credit lines tightened, their social invitations dwindled. Their perfect world was slowly, imperceptibly crumbling around them. The grand gala for the opening of the Thorn Foundation's Millbrook campus was set to be the social event of the year. The campus, a state-of-the-art facility for technological innovation and community outreach, was Ethan's brainchild, a symbol of his commitment to his hometown. Every influential figure, from politicians to billionaires, was expected to attend. And Eleanor and Sterling, despite their declining social standing, pulled every string, leveraged every last favor to secure their invitations. They saw it as their last best chance to re-establish their credibility. Sylvia watched them from afar, a silent observer in their charade. Eleanor on the phone would gush about the gala to Sylvia. Mother, I simply must find the perfect gown. It's so important to make an impression. Everyone who is anyone will be there. Sylvia would offer bland advice, secretly noting Eleanor's increasingly desperate tone. The night of the gala arrived. The Millbrook campus gleamed under a canopy of twinkling lights, a beacon of prosperity and innovation. Luxury cars lined the winding drive, disgorging guests dressed in their finest. Inside the grand ballroom was a buzz with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Sylvia arrived on Ethan's arm, a vision in a midnight blue gown, her silver hair styled elegantly, her face radiating a quiet strength. The transformation was astonishing. Gone was the tired farm woman, replaced by a woman of poise and undeniable presence. She moved through the throng, acknowledging greetings, accepting compliments, a queen in her own right. Ethan, always by her side, introduced her as my mother, the guiding force behind everything I do, eliciting murmurs of admiration. Eleanor and Sterling were there. Their faces, carefully composed, a strained joviality, masking their desperation. Eleanor, in a dress that was a little too tight, a little too sparkly, spotted Sylvia across the room. Her eyes, initially wide with awe at Sylvia's elegant transformation, quickly narrowed with a mixture of envy and renewed avarice. She began making her way through the crowd, Sterling trailing behind her, eager to bask in the reflected glow of Sylvia's new status. The main event of the evening was a speech by Ethan Thorne, detailing the Foundation's mission and future projects. As he stepped onto the brightly lit stage, the room hushed. Cameras flashed, capturing his commanding presence. Ethan spoke eloquently, passionately about the power of community, the importance of nurturing talent, and the transformative impact of giving back. Sylvia watched him, her heart swelling with pride. As he concluded his remarks, he turned to face Sylvia, who was seated in a place of honor in the front row. "But none of this," he said, his voice resonating through the ballroom. "None of my success, none of the good. This foundation will do would have been possible without one extraordinary woman. A woman who, when I was a lost and hungry child, opened her home, her heart, and her kitchen to me. She taught me about integrity, about loyalty, about what it truly means to be family. She is my mother, Sylvia Morrison." A spotlight swung to Sylvia, and the room erupted in applause. She rose, acknowledging the ovation with a graceful bow. Her eyes meeting Ethan's, a silent message of profound love and gratitude passing between them. Eleanor and Sterling, watching from a few rows back, exchanged a glance. Eleanor's face was a mask of forced smiles, her eyes darting around, calculating. This was it. This was their moment. They had to get to Sylvia, to show everyone they were part of this new, powerful family. Ethan then gestured to the massive projection screen behind him. "And now for a special message about the true spirit of resilience and community." The screen flickered to life, showing images of the pristine Millbrook farmlands, Arthur's old farmhouse, idyllic scenes of rural life. A collective murmur went through the crowd. This was a tribute to the local heritage they assumed. Then the images changed. They became dark, smoky, devastating. Flames licking at the farmhouse, the barn collapsing into ash, the orchard reduced to charred stumps. Gasps rippled through the audience. 6 months ago, Ethan's voice continued, a somber note entering his tone. A devastating wildfire swept through these very lands, destroying homes and livelihoods. Among them was the Morrison family farm, a place of deep personal significance to me. Eleanor, seeing the images, subtly nudged Sterling. This was a chance to show sympathy, to present themselves as victims too. While wildfires are often acts of nature, Ethan continued, his voice now imbued with a chilling gravitas that silenced the room completely. Sometimes they are acts of malice, orchestrated by individuals driven by greed. A single grainy black and white photo flashed on the screen. Sterling Randolph, shaking hands with Desmond Croft beneath the headline, "Prominent Local Developer." Desmond Croft announces partnership with Randolph Investments for Millbrook Resort Project, a collective intake of breath. The room was utterly still, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Eleanor's forced smile vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. Sterling's face, already pale, turned ashen. Ethan's voice dropped each word a hammer blow. My forensic team has uncovered irrefutable evidence. The fire that destroyed Sylvia Morrison's home was not an accident. It was an act of arson deliberately planned and executed to acquire valuable land for a new resort project. A project conceived by Mr. Sterling Randolph in collusion with a known developer, Mr. Desmond Croft. On the screen, new images appeared, a detailed reconstruction of the fire's origin point text messages between Sterling and Croft discussing accelerating liquidation financial transfers, incriminating phone records. The narrative built damning and undeniable. Then a short audio clip, played amplified through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. It was the crackly recording Ethan had shared with Sylvia. The old woman is stubborn, won't sell for a dime less than her sentimental value. It's prime land for the new resort project, Desmond. We need her out. Sterling's voice clear and cold. Patience, Sterling. Accidents happen. The summer fires are always a blessing for problematic properties. A well-placed spark, a bit of wind. Who's going to question it? Desmond Croft's gravelly voice. And then that dry, rustling cackle of a laugh. Sylvia's heart pounded not with fear, but with a fierce satisfaction. She glanced at Eleanor and Sterling. Eleanor had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking not with remorse, Sylvia suspected, but with the utter devastation of public humiliation. Sterling stood frozen, his eyes wide and vacant like a man who had just seen his entire world disintegrate before his very eyes. A murmur began to rise in the room, growing into a shocked roar of outrage and disbelief. People were pointing at Sterling and Eleanor, whispering furiously. The cameras, initially focused on Ethan, now swiveled wildly, capturing the unfolding drama, the live feeds broadcasting the downfall of Millbrook's elite to a national audience. Ethan raised a hand, and the noise subsided, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. This investigation, he continued, his voice ringing with authority, is now in the hands of the state authorities. But let this be a testament. The Thorn Foundation does not just build innovation, it champions justice, and it protects its own. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the now stunned faces of the audience, then settling for a fraction of a second on Eleanor and Sterling before returning to Sylvia. Tonight, we celebrate new beginnings. But we also remember that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in integrity, loyalty, and the unwavering love of family, the kind of family that chooses you. And for that, I thank my mother, Sylvia Morrison, for everything. The applause this time was deafening, a roar of approval mixed with a palpable sense of vindication. People rushed to Sylvia, shaking her hand, offering words of support and commiseration. She was no longer the homeless woman or the farm widow. She was a survivor, a symbol of resilience, a woman of strength who had, through her chosen son, brought a corrupt system to its knees. Eleanor, her face streaked with tears, looked up from her hands, her eyes locking onto Sylvia's across the crowded ballroom. There was no longer any pretense, only raw, unadulterated fear and profound loss. Sterling, finally snapping out of his stupor, made a clumsy attempt to slip out the side door, but was quickly intercepted by two stern-faced men in dark suits. Sylvia held her daughter's gaze, a quiet, knowing sadness in her own eyes. Eleanor's world had crumbled, not by an accidental fire, but by her own choices. And Sylvia, the woman she had abandoned, stood tall, surrounded by a love and respect she had never dared to dream of. The chapel doors, though metaphorical, had indeed opened, and Sylvia, the hunter, had walked in. 6 months later, Sylvia was sitting on her front porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold, a scene of serene beauty that was now a daily blessing. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Eleanor's number. Her 5th attempt to reach Sylvia this week. Sylvia let it go to voicemail. It wasn't that she was angry with Eleanor anymore. Anger required too much energy, and Sylvia had found better uses for hers. She was learning to paint watercolors with an instructor Ethan had found for her, discovering a latent talent she'd never had time to explore. She was volunteering at the regional animal shelter, something she'd always wanted to do, but never had the means or freedom for. She was taking a literature class at the community college, devouring books she'd always meant to get to during those 40 years of working 3 jobs and raising an ungrateful child. Most importantly, she was learning what it felt like to be someone's priority instead of someone's obligation. Ethan visited every week, sometimes twice, when his schedule allowed, flying in on his private jet. He'd bring his laptop and work from Sylvia's kitchen table while she cooked, just like when he was a teenager. Sometimes he brought colleagues to introduce to her, brilliant, accomplished people who treated Sylvia with the respect due to someone who'd shaped their boss's character. "This is Sylvia," he'd tell them, his arm around her shoulders, his voice brimming with pride. "She taught me everything that matters about integrity and loyalty. Everything good about who I am started at her kitchen table." Last month, he'd surprised Sylvia by having that kitchen table scarred and familiar shipped from the old farmhouse ruins. Somehow his people had found it intact in the debris, barely damaged a poignant bridge between her old life and her new one. The voicemail notification chimed. Against her better judgment, Sylvia played Eleanor's message. "Mother, it's me again. I know you're probably tired of hearing from me, but I really need to talk to you. Things have gotten complicated and Her voice broke raw with desperation. "I need your advice. Please call me back." Sylvia deleted the message without a second thought. Some lessons she knew could only be learned through consequences, and Eleanor was still learning hers. Through mutual acquaintances, Sylvia had heard about those consequences. Sterling, facing multiple charges of arson, fraud, and conspiracy, was out on an astronomical bail. His business in tatters, his reputation utterly destroyed. He was suing Eleanor for divorce, blaming her for his downfall, claiming she had manipulated him into the scheme to acquire the farm. Their once perfect marriage had dissolved into a bitter public war. Eleanor's own social standing in Millbrook had plummeted after the gala's revelations. No one wanted to be associated with her. She'd been forced to sell Sterling's BMW and was reportedly downsizing their house, the Persian rug, long since sold on eBay 3 months prior. A bitter irony. She was living in a small apartment above a laundromat, working shifts at Murphy's Diner, the very diner where Sylvia had worked for years. "I'm living in a studio apartment above the laundromat," Eleanor had tearfully confessed during an uninvited visit to Sylvia's porch a month ago, her designer clothes replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting dress. "I'm working at the diner where you used to work. The same diner Mother, Murphy's." Sylvia had felt a twinge of something then. Not quite sympathy, but recognition. She knew what it was like to work at Murphy's, to come home exhausted and smelling like grease. But Sylvia had done it out of love to support her child. Eleanor was doing it because her choices had finally caught up with her. "I'm sorry you're struggling," Sylvia had said then, and she meant it. "But your problems aren't mine to solve anymore. But I'm your daughter. Don't I deserve forgiveness?" Eleanor had cried, her voice rising in desperation. "You're a 40-year-old woman who made her choices clearly and deliberately," Sylvia had replied calmly. "You chose Sterling over me, money over family, appearances over love. Now you have to live with those choices. People make mistakes." "Mother, don't I deserve forgiveness?" That's when Sylvia had looked at her. Really looked at her. And saw not the scared child she was pretending to be, but the calculating woman she'd become. Forgiveness isn't the same as rescue, Sylvia had told her. "I forgave you months ago. But forgiving you doesn't mean I'm going to save you from the consequences of your actions." Eleanor had left after that, but not before Sylvia caught her taking photos of the mansion with her phone, probably planning to sell them to some gossip blog, or use them to convince people she still had access to Ethan's wealth through Sylvia. a last pathetic attempt at manipulation. This morning, Ethan was coming for their weekly breakfast. He'd been traveling for the past 10 days, closing a deal that would apparently add another 500 million to his net worth. But he'd called every day, checking on Sylvia, making sure she was happy and healthy and had everything she needed. She heard his helicopter before she saw it. The familiar whop, whop, whop that had become the soundtrack of her new life. As he walked up the front steps, she marveled again at the transformation. Not just his success, but the way he carried himself now. Confident, powerful, but still gentle when he looked at her. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, kissing her cheek, his smile warm and genuine. "How's my favorite mother today?" "Perfect now that you're here." He settled into the chair beside her, accepting the coffee Maria brought out. "Any word from Eleanor this week?" 5 calls. I didn't answer any of them. He nodded approvingly. "Good. You've given her enough chances. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh." Sylvia confessed, a faint whisper of her old guilt resurfacing. "Miss Sylvia," he said, taking her hand in both of his grip firm and reassuring. "You spent 30 years being too soft. You gave and gave until you had nothing left. Look where it got you. Standing on her doorstep begging for shelter after you'd lost everything." He was right, but it was still difficult to completely let go of the ingrained maternal guilt. "She's still my daughter, and I'm still your son. The difference is I chose to be. Every day I wake up grateful that you saved me. Eleanor wakes up resentful that you weren't perfect." His voice grew firm, unwavering. "You don't owe her anything more than what you've already given." Later that afternoon, as Ethan worked on his laptop in the kitchen and Sylvia prepared dinner, she found herself thinking about the winding path that had led her here. The fire that destroyed her farm had felt like the end of everything. But it had really been the beginning. The beginning of learning that she was worth more than she'd ever allowed herself to believe. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Eleanor this time, but from Maria Santos, a woman Sylvia had met through the foundation. Maria was a single mother of 3 in a small town in Nevada, working 2 jobs and struggling to pay for her daughter's cancer treatments. "Mrs. Morrison," the text read. "The foundation's emergency fund paid for Emma's surgery today. The doctors say she's going to be fine. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for our family. You saved my little girl's life." Sylvia showed the message to Ethan, who smiled and squeezed her shoulder. "This is what matters," he said, his eyes alight. "This is the legacy you're building." That evening, as Sylvia sat on her porch, watching another spectacular sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, she thought about Eleanor working her shift at Murphy's Diner, going home to her studio apartment, probably scrolling through photos of Sylvia's new life on social media, feeling sorry for herself. She thought about Sterling, whose social climbing and materialism had cost him everything he thought he valued, now facing legal ruin. And Sylvia thought about herself, a 64-year-old woman who'd lost her farm but found her worth, who'd been rejected by her daughter, but embraced by the son she'd chosen to love. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some end with acceptance. Accepting that you can't save people who don't want to be saved. That you can't love people into loving you back. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people live with the consequences of their choices. Her phone rang again, Eleanor's number. This time, Sylvia turned the phone off completely. Tomorrow, Ethan and Sylvia were flying to Denver to visit another foundation project. Next week, she was meeting with a publisher who wanted her to write a book about resilience and second chances. Next month, she was taking a cooking class in Tuscany, something she'd dreamed about for decades, but never thought she'd be able to afford. She was living the life she'd always deserved, but never thought to ask for. And she was living it with people who chose her, valued her, and loved her exactly as she was. The boy Sylvia had saved her right back. And this time she was smart enough to accept the rescue. Some families are born, some are built, and some are earned through years of loyalty, love, and sacrifice that's recognized and returned instead of taken for granted. Sylvia had finally learned the difference, and it had made all the difference in the world. Sylvia's journey is a stark reminder that self-worth is not conferred by blood, but by our actions and the choices we make, both for ourselves and for others. It's a powerful narrative about finding your true family, not necessarily in those who share your DNA, but in those whose loyalty is forged in shared struggles and unconditional love. Her story challenges us to look beyond superficial appearances and societal expectations, to recognize the quiet heroes in our lives, and to understand that sometimes the greatest acts of love are not those that enable, but those that allow for consequences. If you saw yourself in Sylvia's story, if you've ever felt discarded, undervalued, or taken for granted, know that your worth is intrinsic, not dependent on external validation. Your capacity for love, resilience, and growth is your superpower. Embrace the journey of self-discovery, and never compromise your peace for those who do not see your light. Subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of human emotion, the complexities of family, and the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. May you find peace in your own journey and the strength to choose your own path.